I watched my wife kill our son. 20 years ago, my wife and I made a mistake that would haunt us for the rest of our lives. It was a cold night in February. An argument ensued between my wife and son, and things got out of hand. My wife had smacked my son, hard, multiple times while he screamed. The boy was only 9 years old when this happened, and I could see in his face the moment the first hit landed that he would be traumatized for years to come. His eyes welled up with tears, and his wails became deafening. I tried to intervene, and was shoved away while she pummeled his face. Her open palm closed into a fist, and I could see that blood had begun to spill from his lips and nostrils. After a few more punches, my son stopped moving. Then after a few more, his chest stopped rising up and down rhythmically. My wife, in her drunken state, shook him violently, proclaiming, "Get up, you little brat. You know you're faking. Now stop begging for attention." My son remained still. This prompted 2 more slaps from my intoxicated wife, while I stared on like a coward. "I'm not going to ask you again, you shit. Get up and go clean your fucking room." As the last word escaped her lips, I finally found the power to speak, though timidly. "Honey, I don't think he's getting up this time." "Bullshit. He's done this before. You've seen it," she interrupted. Just before she could take one last swipe at our son, she shot up straight, hiccuped, and announced, "Have to pee," before stumbling towards our bathroom. I stayed there, staring at my son's lifeless body that was now surrounded by blood on our living room floor. I wept, silently, my mind racing 1,000,000 miles a minute, circling the same, "How are we going to get out of this?" thought. As I knelt over my son, letting my tears fall to his chest as I begged for his forgiveness, I could hear my wife snoring in our bedroom. This broke something within me. I stopped crying. I stopped feeling. I stopped being sorry for myself. My wife had just beaten our son to death while I watched on, refusing to put an end to it. I was an accomplice. I was going to jail no matter what. But justice would not be even in this case. My actions compared to my wife's were absolutely minimal. But I guess that's where the problem arises. I felt a moral decay come over me as I inched closer and closer to our bedroom. I found my wife in a pool of her own urine, blackout, drunk on the bed that I paid for. I'm sure you can see where this is going, but I guess I should explain what happened. See, I couldn't find it within myself to bludgeon my wife, nor could I find it within myself to let her walk away from this. I'm uncomfortable with confrontation, and I hate blood. Why do you think I froze when everything was unraveling? But I needed to make her pay for this. Grabbing one of the pillows, I pressed firmly against her face. Once I started, I felt the anger in me rise to a boil, and before I could even realize, I was holding the pillow against my wife's face with all the force I could muster, while she kicked and flailed like a dying animal. That's what she was, a dying animal. Once she stopped moving, I couldn't help but feel a hint of irony. "Get up, you shit. I know you're faking," I whispered into her ear. I left the room calmly and went to the kitchen to brew a fresh pot of tea. If I was going to prison, I was at least going to make sure I got to enjoy one last delicacy before I was behind bars. As I sat on the couch in front of my son, I dialed up 911 and I told them plainly, "My name is Donovan Meeks. My wife murdered my son, and I've just murdered my wife," before providing them with an address. I sat and waited for what felt like mere moments before the sounds of police sirens came echoing from down the street, and my living room became illuminated with flashing red and blue lights. When the knocking started, I answered the door as calmly as could be, and surrendered without a fight. 2 police officers went inside the house to investigate and returned a few moments later, with grim looks on their faces. One of them asked me what happened, and I explained it to them verbatim. The coroners arrived, and just as I was being taken away in a police car, I heard a paramedic scream from my front porch. "The boy's still alive! We need to get him to the ambulance, now!" I couldn't believe what I heard, and the sheer shock of the news snapped me out of my psychosis as I began to sob once again. I was sentenced to 20 years. A full life sentence was off the table due to what my lawyers defined as temporary insanity brought on by a traumatic event. That's where I spent these last 2 decades, rotting away in a cell, forced to think about my actions. However, today was my release date, and I couldn't have been more thrilled to finally get out of my cage. My house had been completely paid off prior to my conviction, and I looked forward to finally being able to have a normal roof over my head again, even if it was the one that sheltered us when my family fell apart. Once my driver entered the neighborhood, I grew a little nervous when I noticed that there were 2 cars parked in my driveway. I got out of the car regardless, and when I knocked on the door, my son answered. The same son who refused to visit me. The son who acted like I didn't even exist. The son that I killed over and threw my life away for. He didn't even give me the time of day. He opened the door just enough to peek at me through a crack before slamming it shut and screaming for me to go away. I could hear what sounded to be a crying toddler from beyond the door, as well as hushed whispers between my son and his wife, I assume. I felt that feeling come over me again, that boiling rage that took over when I killed my wife. I tried to stifle it, but I couldn't. I'd been through too much to be shut out by some little brat and his family. I began kicking the door as hard as I could until I could feel the hinges breaking with each blow. The baby's screams grew louder as my son and his wife begged me to stop. But I couldn't. With one final kick, the door fell off its hinges, and I was greeted face to face with a barrel of a gun. In my own home. Held by my own son, who I had avenged all those years ago. He had the nerve to ask me to leave. I had the nerve to ask him what he was going to do with the rifle in his hand. In response, he cocked back the hammer and announced he was going to give me one more chance. I could see that his wife was on the phone with who I assumed was 911. I was going to jail regardless. I won't tell you what ensued, but I will tell you that my son's wife has an impeccable taste for tea, and enjoying it while I wait is absolutely remarkable, especially without the cries of that damned baby.